If you walk into this New York diner on a Friday night, you first notice the bright lights reflecting off the chrome and a long row of uniform red stools. It's a loud, crowded space that doesn't usually leave much room for quiet sentimentality. But at 7 p.m., the door opens and 78-year-old Arthur walks in. He wears the same brown coat every week, cutting a predictable path through the noise. The staff knows the routine. A waitress greets him warmly and asks, "Table for two?" Arthur nods, smiles back, and lets her lead him to his usual spot. The scene feels wrong the moment he sits down. In a room buzzing with social energy and shared meals, Arthur sits alone at a table set for two, creating a strange, quiet pocket of air in the middle of the rush. Jake, a new waiter at the diner, is the first to really watch the pattern. He spends his shifts tracking the man in the brown coat, trying to find a logic in the repetition. The order never changes. Arthur asks for 2 coffees and 2 identical, full-size dinners, placing them on opposite sides of the table. An hour later, Arthur leaves. He pays the full bill, but one side of the table remains untouched, the coffee cold and the plate exactly as it was served. Most people try to distance themselves from the things that remind them of a loss, but Arthur was doing the exact opposite, intentionally paying for the physical evidence of an absence every single week. One night, Jake finally approaches the table. He keeps his voice low and asks Arthur if he's still waiting for someone to arrive. Arthur doesn't look away. He pulls out a weathered photograph of a smiling woman and introduces her as his wife, Margaret. Their first date happened at this exact diner in 1968. While the city outside went through decades of construction and decay, their Friday night tradition stayed behind, locked in place. That tradition lasted 52 years. They never missed a Friday, creating a half-century of history in one corner of a New York diner. Arthur wasn't acting out of confusion. He was anchored to a lifetime of shared Friday nights that felt more substantial to him than the empty chair in front of him. That streak was finally interrupted 3 years ago. Margaret was moved to a hospital room with a terminal cancer diagnosis, and they both knew their time at the diner was ending. Margaret used her final days to make Arthur promise that he wouldn't stop living his life or visiting their places just because she was gone. Arthur couldn't see a way forward. He told her he couldn't imagine being in the diner without her sitting across from him. Margaret's solution was simple. He had to go for both of them. That's why he orders the second meal, and why he still leaves her specific, generous tip before he walks out. These visits weren't about the food. Every Friday, Arthur was showing up to keep the final promise he made in that hospital room. That promise was put to a final test during the blizzard that began shutting the city down early. The streets were nearly impassable, and the diner staff started locking the doors to head home. Jake kept glancing at the corner table. As the wind picked up outside, Arthur's seat remained empty for the first time in 3 years. Minutes before the lights went out, Arthur pushed through the door. He was shivering, covered in a thick layer of white, and struggling to stay on his feet. He had walked through a dangerous storm, because the only thing worse than the cold was the thought of Margaret waiting at that table alone. Arthur took his seat one last time. He looked at Margaret's photo, whispered that he would see her soon, and finally let his eyes close. He passed away right there, at the table where their story began, with 2 cups of coffee still steaming in front of him. A year later, Jake is the manager of the diner. He's the one who makes sure the legacy of that corner table isn't forgotten. There is now a permanent Arthur and Margaret reserved sign fixed to the table, ensuring that no one else ever sits in those 2 chairs. Real love leaves a permanent mark on a place. It turns a regular corner of a diner into a landmark, showing everyone who passes by that some promises never actually end.